Hi, and thanks for joining another session of the Sitecore PowerShell extensions. In this session, I'd like to discuss the contributor guide changes. This would allow for someone new or perhaps someone that has been contributing in the past to start working with Sitecore PowerShell extensions and running it within Docker. If you've had any time, any experience working with Sitecore where you've had to run the installer over and over, or perhaps you've had to use SIM, or most recently using the Sitecore installation framework and the Sitecore installation wizard that comes with it, you notice that it's kind of difficult to maintain many installations. And working with Docker has really simplified that for me, especially for SPE. And so I'm going to cover some of the basics of how things are set up in the repository. And if you'd like to contribute in the future, well, you'd have some resource in addition to the book to reference. So once you've cloned the repository, and in this example, I'm working off of the Docker branch. Eventually, it'll be on the master, and so no need to switch there. But once we've cloned that, you'll notice that has been a change in the folder structure. We've moved all of the serialization files, specifically the unicorn files, have moved from the source. Well, source wasn't actually there, so it moved from the data directory and has gone up to the root. And I moved all the code files into a source folder. If you're familiar with Docker, you've worked with some of the Docker images produced by Sitecore and the community, you would notice that the source folder is typically used for the code deployments that get synced with the Docker image. In this case, I didn't do that. I actually reserved that for code, and then the deploy folder is where all of the compiled assets are going to drop. I carried over several of the typical things you expect with the Docker images. So we've got a data directory, the environment file, the clean data script, a compose configuration, and then most of this was already with SPE. If you've contributed in the past, a couple things that you might have noticed that are different. One specifically is the deploy user JSON file. We were using this to help with the configuration. Let's see, I don't have it open. If you had multiple instances of Sitecore on your machine, this file would be used to help tell the deployment script where to copy the files to. And I feel like this really isn't needed anymore, because if you had Docker images for the different versions of Sitecore you wanted to support, then we could just use the compose files to help differentiate between which version of Sitecore that you're going to use. So at the moment, this is not being used, and I expect that will continue to be the case. There's also another file, the it would have been Cognify, but ZSPE development user directory, config. This had the purpose of whenever you would do the deployment, the SPE folder path would be extracted from the config, and it would, I believe it would be replaced in this file. And so whatever would get deployed to a given environment, it would have an absolute path to wherever your code is contained. This really isn't needed anymore, and I would imagine that this variable will just go away, and the purpose of the config would purely be for enable the different remoting endpoints and making any adjustments that are needed, like in the case of Unicorn. I think what I have here most recently added was I don't want to publish any of the items automatically, because when you're working with SPE, you don't really spend much time in a content delivery server. All right, and if we jump back up to the top, we've got the compose file. This is going to be used within Docker to help set up the different folder mappings. Volumes would be the right word. So we've got the unicorn directory I referenced earlier is now mapped into a folder within the Docker running container. So when we want to synchronize the items that are on disk into the instance of Sitecore, this folder will be at play. And I had referenced this the Sitecore variable that had a path in it. Well, we don't really need that because this is there, and it's a default location that Unicorn is going to search for. So thanks to Mark Cassidy for helping me get this working properly. The log files are going to jump into the data directory. I don't really refer to that too much. I usually look at the logs that spill out within the console, but this is obviously something that you could explore more if you wish to. There is a override file optionally you can create, and the purpose of this for me was on my machine that I'm developing with. I'm using a community version of Visual Studio, and most people contributing might be working from their office and using a professional or enterprise. So if you want to make some changes to whatever's in this compose file, create an override file, and then the entire section that needs to be replaced, put that into the file. So don't try to just change one line. You need to change the entire section of the configuration. So once you have this, and assuming you've already followed any of the previous tutorials with building Docker images on your local machine, you're going to open a command prompt. I don't think an elevated prompt is required, and you would do that like so, and then simply run the command docker compose up, and this will create containers from the existing images on your machine, and then Sitecore will be up and running. If for some reason you are testing this out on your machine and you've got a newer version of a Sitecore image, so for example, let's say a 9.4 or whatever is out, then you'd probably end up needing to replace the version here. Another point to mention is that in the deploy directory, I have created an app data folder and put in my license file. There are some other ways to do that. Like an alternative solution would be to run a PowerShell command that's included with the Docker images repository. Basically, it would create an environment variable with that key in a base64 format. I've chosen not to go that route just for simplicity. Dump the file in here, and then basically forever this license file is available. If I need to change it out, then I just put a new file and the file watcher will copy it over. So I've got my Sitecore instance up and running, and I should be able to confirm that. Localhost on port 44001. So starting back from the beginning, I'm going to load the Sitecore instance. And you can see that there are no items that would typically indicate that you have SPE installed. And if I go to the Unicorn page, I assume you'll still get a broken page. Yep. And now we're going to rebuild the solution, which should copy all of the appropriate files here. This is going to include the Unicorn libraries, any of the specific assets related to the console or the IIC, so JavaScript, XML, and so forth. Any binaries that are compiled or referenced by SPE. So just keep in mind that what we're talking about here is just so that you can work with SPE locally. There's a separate process to package up SPE into the various package formats, and we won't cover that at the moment. All right, so I've done the deployment, and if the site still runs, then I should be able to jump back to the Unicorn page and watch that load up. Okay, so Sitecore still works, and let's try Unicorn again. If we jump back and said, I did this for the first time, this page would load, you would sync the core, and this should be relatively quick. Okay, so now we've got the core completed. Then you should be able to see everything in here. Here, it'll let you sync everything. All right, after a few minutes of waiting for this to all sync, it finally complete. And now if I refresh the page, you can see. And there you have it. SPE has now been synchronized with a new Docker container. Now, in the event that you want to shut the container down or Docker Compose down, the next time you start it up, you don't need to go through this entire process. It'll just be a fully operational instance of Sitecore. All right. Well, I think that's all for today. If you've got any questions, feel free to reach out to me on the Sitecore Stack Exchange or the Sitecore chat. There's an SPE channel specific to this module. Talk to you soon. Bye.